engineers are building for engineers, and there's a lot of innovation in this space because the models are so good at writing code. I think there's stuff that comes out that we get excited about putting into the product. For the most part, it's less bottom up from the customers wanting more AI tools. I think a lot of it's been like internally coming up with ideas, more exposure to the features and the competitor landscape, and thinking of ways, alternative ways to solve it. You can get the AI to evaluate the AI output, but then at a certain point, who's watching the Watchmen? You need humans in the loop. So then, okay, how do you scale that?
Hello, everybody. You are listening to Agents After Dark, powered by Prefactor. I am Matt Doughty, your host and the CEO and co-founder of Prefactor.ai. Prefactor is building the agentic control plane to allow regulated enterprise to track, manage, and control your agentic stack. Build a single source of truth for your organization to drive return on investment and get your board off your back. Today on Agents After Dark, we're talking with Matthew Blode at Linktree. Matthew has built and sold 2 startups over the past few years and is now building Linktree's Link apps from within. Matthew is also an OpenAI Codex ambassador, so is very deep in the AI coding and Codex community. Thank you very much for joining us today, Matthew.
Thank you for having me.
Not at all. So I just kick off. You know, you've built 2 companies from scratch and gone on to exit. What changed about going from 0 to 1 once AI became part of that stack?
Yeah, so I think starting in 2020 when I built Venue Safe, obviously ChatGPT hadn't launched. And so, 100% of that was manually handwritten code like the good old days. And I think starting 2023 when I co-founded Fingertip, that's kind of the transition where things started to move, and the workflows up until today are evolving, I guess, week by week. But the percentage of the code is written by AI now. So I think today I'm probably writing less code than I ever have, but outputting more ultimately.
And I mean, obviously the big question there is like, you're working for a massive Australian success story, billion-dollar company. Like, how do you manage the risk of AI code getting it wrong?
Yeah, I think with my own startup, smaller scale, especially at that MVP stage, it's definitely a priority of shipping fast and iterating quickly. And I think your risk tolerance changes greatly. With Linktree's 60 plus million users, there's definitely a different onus of kind of standards of quality. But I think even still, you can get an even greater benefit by leaning into AI programming for your workflow, because I think as a code base evolves and there's more dependencies, I think using the AI tooling helps leverage your ability to review, to think through and plan and create technical specs. I think it's supplemental. It doesn't replace your ability, but it is that kind of safety net ultimately for your coding standards. So especially since I've joined Linktree only since September, it's a new code base that I'm learning. So there's a lot of need to use these AI tools to help get context, find like kind of the best existing patterns. And I think if I had gone in without AI, I don't think I could make nearly the same impact in the code base.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So like, if you were to estimate how much code you're building in kind of Codex or insert solution of choice versus just coding the manual way, what would you say was the split?
I think getting to 90+%,
Wow.
I'd say. But within that, there's a lot of workflows for code reviewing, for simplifying, for auditing, multiple coding agents, multiple layers of human code review, my own code review. So it's not just necessarily, it's just type a prompt, it's in production. There's lots of layers there to make sure you have velocity, but you also are doing things safely.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've recently discovered, perhaps later than most, Claude Code. And I certainly went into it thinking I could just type a couple of prompts in and it would just work. And then I think you realise, well, I don't think everyone's going to be using Claude Code every day, because it takes an awful lot of work to kind of uncover the things that have gone wrong, implement kind of good practice around engineering, and none of that's gone away. So when you built Fingertip as an AI-powered website builder, like, what was the moment you realised this is production grade versus just a cool demo?
Yeah, I think through the initial version, kind of my use of AI evolved. But when I was building the MVP, a lot of that was back in the day where Claude Code didn't exist. I was kind of working on the database schema in Claude, like the web app. And that's where it was like the AI, like kind of a conversational planning about how to build the database backend, how to implement this feature and doing research. So it was a bit more removed from the code base. I think today now with Claude Code and Codex CLI, a lot of that is happening in the code base. It has the context of your files, your agents.md file. It has kind of access to your GitHub, access to linear. So there's a lot more rich context. And I think with the models getting even smarter, the workflow's changed where now I'm just inputting as much context as I possibly can into the AI. I'm doing plan mode. I'm making sure there's phases and to-dos. There's a lot that can go in up front, and the output, once that plan is in place, the output is like exceptional. So I think it's sort of been a gradual transition over the last few years to just leaning in harder and harder on AI as it can do more with the models and with the tooling.
That makes sense. And was there ever a moment during that build phase when you shifted from just doing conversational use of Claude into coding, and that was a kind of an aha moment of, yeah, this is going to change everything?
Yeah, I think I was pretty early to Claude Code, and I think that was the aha moment. Going from the Claude in the chat, I was like never really on board with Cursor. I didn't find the auto completion so useful a couple years ago. But I think Claude Code, being in the code base, being able to read the files, figure out the context and search, replace, write all the code for you with this incredible like agent harness. I think that was like the turning point, and the models have just gotten better and better to the point where you can be a bit more vague and the AI does figure it out. I think I wouldn't recommend lowering your standards on your prompts, but it is quite incredible what it's able to figure out just with pretty vague instructions that if you gave to a human, they would be like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that was definitely the experience I had last week. I mean, going to the kind of I wouldn't say negative, but certainly the side effects of using AI to build kind of a startup. How did you handle when introduced kind of maybe bugs or hallucinations or examples where maybe it resulted in a customer churn or something? Like, have you had those sort of examples or experiences? And I'd love to know how you handled them.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. I think still maintaining feature velocity and good standards is very hard. I think a lot of the time, the workflow where I landed was to work in very like discrete layers instead of just getting it to YOLO the whole feature end to end and kind of just hallucinate and make up, let's say, API endpoints that don't exist. I think being very discreet about, okay, we're going to work on the database schema and the migration files and kind of finding the edges of the API and how other products do it, and just making sure the foundations are there, and then working on the schema for the back end and making sure the interfaces are smart and intuitive. And then, so if you go layer by layer into the front end and you make sure the front end is type safe, then I guess ultimately you can trust that thread end to end is going to be more or less functional. Obviously, there's still unit testing, end-to-end testing, integration tests, manual QA, but I think being diligent and deliberate is definitely still necessary.
That makes sense. And I guess just aside from that, are there any, do you recall any examples where you maybe lost customers as a result of kind of an error within AI?
I think our problem was maybe introducing features and trying to be a bit bullish and aggressive and like how quickly we wanted to ship to main and ship to production. There definitely was some rough edges with the product as we were just iterating towards like what the gold standard and what our customers actually wanted. So I think along the way, say specifically, we introduced an invoicing feature and there was a bug when we upgraded one of the dependencies. And so they were trying to create an invoice and like the input field didn't work because the AI hallucinated about the version upgrade. And so there's sort of things like that where unless you kind of manually QA those changes, you wouldn't have necessarily caught it through the whole CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah, interesting. And so did that kind of invoicing error make its way into production?
Yeah, it did, which was unfortunate. I think it was about like they weren't able to create the invoice, which if we were smarter about, I guess, having more manual QA or having more automated testing, I think we could have caught that issue. But there's obviously a trade-off with feature velocity and how quickly you want to iterate, because if you have infinite unit tests, then to make a change becomes very hard. So I think as a startup, your equation for testing changes drastically to a bigger company.
That's a really good example, actually, of kind of how something slipped through. I guess when you think, or whether you were thinking, and we'll come on to the time at Linktree now, because it's obviously a different scale of audience, but when you were thinking about where you would implement AI or when you would implement maybe more testing, I mean, invoicing feels like one of those high risk areas that maybe you would have maybe not introduced AI because of the risks. Like, how do you set the limit or the line in the sand where you go, actually, we're happy for AI to kind of run with it, and actually we're not going to implement AI, or we're not going to, maybe you build with AI across all of your stack, but like, where do you draw the line when it comes to the risk reward of leveraging technology like that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. My risk tolerance is relatively high with my own startup versus at Linktree. I want to be very mindful, especially with the size of the user base. So I think those two scales are very, very interesting. And I think that regardless of invoicing or let's say to write a blog, like there's the scales within the feature. And if you're handling currencies, you're handling tax, there's different trade-offs there. But I think also company size and the user base volume and risk tolerance is also a factor. So for invoicing, we still made sure that we had unit tests for all of the utility functions, all the tax calculations, all the handling with Stripe and rounding up and making sure the decimals all working and double entry ledger for the accounting to make sure there's no discrepancies. So we had a lot of infrastructure to ensure the math was correct. I think from a product side, because the web is very tricky, sometimes those bugs can slip through.
No, I mean, appreciate the candidness. That was really interesting. So I guess shifting gears a little bit into, I guess, your current role and away from the startup world. As you mentioned, you've got millions of users, very discerning users who leverage things like Linktree as part of their kind of window to the world for their businesses, whether you're an influencer, or whether you're a small business or big business. When you introduce features now, whether they're AI features or otherwise, how do you decide kind of what to do maybe autonomously versus what needs review? And obviously you talk about your experience with being a startup. Linktree is significantly bigger. How do you manage that risk now?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot more processes in terms of putting something in front of 100% of users, especially on the profile side. So say from a startup, you might just want to have a 5-minute deployment, push to main, get in front of users, like bypass everything, and just that the blast radius is so small, you can kind of be aggressive. Where in Linktree, you want to have feature flags, have internal dogfooding, have manual QA, you want unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, you want human review, you want a few AI code reviewers in GitHub, you want to make sure all of your changes are validated with Claude Code or Codex or Cursor. So I think the spectrum of push to main, let's ship it, versus let's make sure it's correct. I think there's a lot of additional processes you can put in place.
And have those processes failed at all? Have you seen things slip through where you've kind of not expected them to, despite all of that process?
I think so far so good. I think there's always bugs, like no matter how much you test, there's always issues coming up. I think Linktree is very impressive in terms of how they handle deployments and having the build kite pipelines and a lot of infrastructure and tooling there. I think, if you could solve all edge cases, like that would be a miracle, but there's a lot of unknowns that kind of pop up only once you either meet reality or an issue only comes up at that scale. So yeah, I'm not sure if you can avoid it necessarily.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess one question then would be, do you feel like there are now more bugs than before or about the same?
No, I think the code quality is improving. I think there used to be a trade-off between velocity and like using AI to just ship. I think the coding agents are so sophisticated and so impressive that it's doing better work than like it's borderline incredible with the right context in terms of the quality of the output.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I guess the natural question that lots of people ask is, if you're implementing agentic platforms, whether that's coding solutions or otherwise, the inevitable outcome is that you can do more with less. Like, have you seen the need to have fewer engineers as a result of Claude Code or Cursor or these agentic solutions?
I think even with AI and say a higher percentage of code written with AI, it's just a leverage. It's you're able to leverage your capacity and your skills. But I don't think there's an upper limit to how much humans want to create or what they need. I think we're very impressive at we just want higher quality, more taste, more craft, more care, more features, more customization. There's still a huge roadmap of things that we want to build, and I don't necessarily foresee that reducing. I think it probably changes the landscape, obviously, with SaaS companies, and there's more abundance of software, but I think it's boundless almost.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Shifting gears a little bit from building with AI to delivering AI and delivering AI features, what's been your experience of kind of giving AI features within your products to customers, and how have you managed to take them on that journey?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the first version of Fingertip it kind of threw you in the deep end in terms of here's a blank page, create, which is very confronting. And we saw that when we were looking at users, like they would sort of struggle for 30 minutes and then drop off, and what they created was interesting and unique, but not necessarily like to the standards that they wanted to create. So I think over time where we evolved things was we leveraged pre-built templates. So when you onboarded, you would say, okay, I'm a handyman. And so we would look in our database of templates and find the equivalent kind of starter. And then we would use AI to rewrite the content and enrich it based on your location, based on your name, based on your logo. And doing all of that up front meant that once they got into the website builder, they were at like an 80 to 90% like quality website. And it was so much easier to use that starting point where they could look, okay, this is wrong, I'm going to change it, instead of just kind of coming up from a blank sheet of paper, like, this is what I want. So I think there's a lot of paradigm shifting in terms of using AI to just reduce the cognitive load and kind of help people meet their needs more easily. Even when they have any content on a Fingertip website, we had like a write with AI feature, which we just sprinkled through the whole application. So any description, any title, they could use ChatGPT to kind of edit their text. And that just helped people so much, because otherwise the spelling would be wrong, or it wouldn't be verbose enough, or it wouldn't be specific enough. Like, everyone needs some assistance.
I mean, that's a really interesting example of how you can kind of guide people through the journey. And I think what I'm hearing a lot of is that change management is as important as the technology itself, and the speed with which people are transitioning from maybe old techniques and tools to new tools is very fast. And actually, I've worked in kind of post-software sales for a long time, and, the toughest job in software is not selling it. It's how do you adopt the software after the fact. And often, any change is hard, but particularly when it's changing every day. I guess one thing you mentioned there was about quality, and you said 80 to 90% of the websites were at quality that I guess people felt was in line with their expectations. I guess whether you rely now or previously, how do you manage the quality of the outputs? Because a lot of people are concerned about the quality. Obviously, we've talked a bit about coding quality, but when it comes to AI features, I've yet to see a really strong methodology which can be rolled out consistently when it comes to actually managing quality, short of, the standard like LLM kind of models, which I'm not even that au fait with. But how do you manage quality and track that in an organization like Linktree or Fingertip?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's obviously a hard problem. So there's evals which you can do. You can get the AI to evaluate the AI output, but then at a certain point, who's watching the Watchmen? You need humans in the loop. So then, okay, how do you scale that? So that's probably the standard. I know Linktree use a platform called Brain Trust for evals, which is analytics and dashboards, so you can kind of get observability on what is this AI coming up with. I think another thing is just setting the right guardrails. And if you leave something too open-ended, or you lean on that, let's say ChatGPT coming up with all of the decisions when it could have just been an if-else statement and like very discrete logic, I think you're just opening room for things to go wrong needlessly. So in the Fingertip example where we had templates, we probably today could have generated the whole page from scratch without the need for templates, but that just opens up a whole can of worms in terms of, like you're saying, like, is it just making all of the content up? Did it fail? So I think being smart about how you kind of use this technology is always necessary.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess something that I'm really interested in, obviously we're talking about it from the perspective of engineers building within Claude Code and being at the forefront often of the developments in AI, like Sonnet 4.6 came out yesterday, Opus came out the other day. And these are cutting edge models which are really pushing the boundaries for what you can achieve at which is a considerably low cost for what essentially is the outputs that they're getting. Now, something I'm curious about is, customers speak with sales all the time. They relay back the feedback, they relay back the questions and the product requests. Do you feel like it's customers pushing you guys to develop more AI? Or is it more engineers going, well, I can do this stuff, so I want to introduce this? How's that? I mean, inevitably there'll be a tension there. Like, how does that work at Linktree and with the way you guys work?
If I think of a new technology, let's say like agent skills, this has come out and I'm leveraging it personally for all of my workflows now. So I have skills for auditing the UI, updating the typography, reviewing my pull requests. So I have these markdown files with all of this, the rules and kind of my standards. So that's like a new technology that came out in the last couple months. I think 1% of the world would have ever touched it or heard of it or even looked at it. So there's like things that have come out but aren't like evenly distributed. And I think especially for engineers, we're so close to kind of using AI in our workflows, and engineers are building for engineers, and there's a lot of innovation in this space because the models are so good at writing code. I think there's stuff that comes out that we as engineers get excited about putting into the product. For the most part, it's less bottom up from the customers wanting more AI tools. I think a lot of it's been like internally coming up with ideas, more exposure to the features and the competitor landscape and thinking of alternative ways to solve it. But on the flip side, some users are like, I don't want AI anywhere in this product. Please like make sure that you can disable it, which is also another valid concern. So there's a whole other perspective that you need to cater for.
So why do they not want AI in the tool? Is it like a data concern? I can't imagine why you would not want AI in your...
Yeah, I think if I'm going to steel man their position, I could think about like, I don't want my data leaving your servers and let's say going to a San Francisco company and like, I don't know if they're reading it. I don't know what they're doing with the data, or maybe I'm just kind of happy to write my content. With AI, it's kind of slurped up the whole internet and just generates new text. So I can see why you'd have some issues with that. I can see it from their perspective. I think the alternative is that it's a very powerful tool, and I think I have more leverage and more capacity because of it. So I've made that conscious trade-off, I think, knowing the downsides, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I have 2 points to make. Given that your platform is very much focused on providing a front door to the world from people's social media presences and not wanting their data to flow to US-based companies, there was a slight irony there, I think, from those customers' perspective. Needless to say, I guess from a production kind of product perspective, that's quite a big overhead to prevent people from getting access to some of this new functionality, which ultimately is becoming standard within modern technology. So is there a point where you think that, you guys will just give it to everyone and that's your choice whether you use it or not?
I think still having a way to opt out is probably valuable and necessary. I think on the previous point as well, you might think that the AI is just kind of taking all your data, but there is very deliberate, like privacy policies, privacy restrictions in place. So I just want to preface that the data is being handled safely. But I think if a user wants to use a product without AI, I think it's valid. And I think it's worthwhile supporting them in that choice and not necessarily forcing them in. I think of a software like Z Code Editor. It has a lot of AI functionality, but it respects if you want to disable all of that. I think that's it's a good balance for the user to opt out if they want.
I feel like this is going to be a question of thinking of HTML or something basic part of your platform. AI is going to become part of that. And so I don't imagine in the too distant future you'll have a place where you won't have a choice, because it's like building a website. If you accept that it's being built on Claude Code or Cursor, you're going to have AI tools within it. And then does it not just become a question of data sovereignty as opposed to whether it's using AI or not?
Yeah, that's probably valid. I think Apple's perspective, they've clearly been really late to the party with AI, but I think where they're going is building local LLM models which run on your machine. I think then you can be confident that the data's not going to Cupertino. It's kind of staying local and no one's processing it. So maybe that's the end state here, is like the local LLM models will be good enough. You don't necessarily need to use OpenAI or Gemini, but I don't think we're at that point yet.
Yeah, that also feels like something that an engineer has dreamed up because I think about my parents and their use of AI. I sent them a video or song from Suno that my CTO had generated for Prefactor. And I hadn't played with Suno before, so I was it was amazing. And they would have no idea. And so the idea of having an LLM on the computer, unless it was, I guess, embedded into your OS, that would be interesting concept.
I think Chrome has LLM. It has like a lightweight version of Gemini, which I downloaded locally. I'm not sure if it's let's say it's a gigabyte or something that you download, and then it's just running locally. I don't think anything actually goes to Google when I ask it. So I think we're almost there. We'll see what Apple comes out with.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. I've got a couple of final questions for you. So if I'm a founder today building an AI native product, what's the one mistake you see people making that you would advise people to try and avoid at all costs?
I think with the rate of change right now is very spectacular. I'm pretty young, but I've never seen any technology shift at this rate. So I think from my perspective, it's putting blockers in front of yourself to slow you down in any way. So I just think you need to optimize your workflows and make sure you can iterate quickly and ship quickly and provide value for your users quickly, because things are changing every day. And if you're building a startup, you want to make sure you have clear ownership, you can ship fast, you can lean in towards using these AI tooling. And I think if you're not, you'll kind of get left behind.
I guess just the final question then is, a lot of people out there are struggling kind of adopting or, as I say, moving from proof of concept AI when it comes from a nice, sexy demo that your vendors come along and expose to you. And the challenge is not watching the demo, it's not buying it, it's actually going from that demo into real life. Do you have any tips for organizations thinking about that? And if they've invested in a lot of these POCs, anything that you would absolutely insist, if it was your business again, to do, that you would do to ensure that you wouldn't just waste tons of money on POC?
Yeah, I guess I think of like there's the Pixar method. So when they make a movie, they spend as much time in the storyboarding phase before they actually are like getting their 1,000 animators and sound designers to like produce the final thing. So I actually would lean into prototyping, proof of concepts, and like throw away things that you can iterate on quickly. But I think to make sure that that can get translated into real end user value, what I've found to work is to kind of isolate the core value in that proof of concept. So extracting it into a library or a utility that can actually be leveraged in production environment. I think if you just kind of build something and it works in this very happy, narrow way, I think you still want to make sure that there's value that you can extract and actually put it in production. So there's almost like the proof of concept, get it working end to end, but then that second step of like pulling out the value into the bare bones, because in a way, your prototype can kind of be very greenfield and very innovative and push the needles. But then when it goes into making it for production, things slow down, there's more trade-offs. And so you just, you want that 80-20 principle of like, what is the core value here? Reach out to me on LinkedIn, just search Matthew Blode, Blode, and send me a message. I'm always available to chat or jump on a call and connect. Yeah, and thank you so much, Matt. Great questions. They really got me thinking. Awesome podcast.